Hi, welcome. This is Advanced Math, Trigonometric Identities and Formulas classwork, Part B, page 3. As usual, you should try to do this on your own. You can check the answer key as necessary, but if you're kind of curious about what's going on, you'd like to have an additional perspective, take a look at this video as we walk through what's on this page. So we just had in the previous video, previous pages, that diagram that used to be in the application problem where we had sine and cosine and tangent of 75 degrees. And we developed that into a formula for finding the sine of the sum of two angles and for finding the cosine of the sum of two angles. And we want to go a little further with that and figure out what the sine of the difference of two angles would be. And that's what this process is here. So we have written out that we like to figure out what sine of A minus B is. And it would make sense to say that that really is the same as the sine of the sum of two angles, A plus negative B. So remember that the formula for the sine of A plus B is sine of A cosine of B plus cosine of A sine of B. Now, what we're considering to be the B angle is really minus B, and A is A. So let's fill in these blanks here. So it's going to be sine of the first angle, which is A, times cosine of the second angle, which is negative B. Cosine of the first angle, A, and sine of the second angle, which is negative B. Now, in part A, we looked specifically, I think at the very end of part A, at another way of writing what sine of a negative angle is. So sine of negative B, because the nature of the sine function is the same as negative sine of positive B. And cosine of negative B, because of the symmetry of the cosine function, is the same as cosine of positive B. So now we can take these two facts and substitute them in. Let's see. This fact here, sine of negative B, we can apply here. This fact here, we can apply here and rewrite this. So we're going to get sine of A minus B equals sine of A. And now cosine of negative B turns out to be just plain old cosine of B. And we're adding. Now cosine of A is cosine of A. And sine of negative B is negative sine of B. Now I've written this a little kooky because this turned into negative sine of B. Now this isn't cosine of A minus sine of B, it's cosine of A times negative sine of B, which means we should rewrite this one last time. Not plus, minus B you can bring that minus out front here. So sine of A minus B is sine of A cosine B minus cosine A sine of B. Sine, cosine, sine, cosine, cosine, sine. The difference is that now, whereas with sine of A plus B, or A plus B from the previous section, page, we had a plus here. Now because it's sine of A minus B, there's a minus here. So that's the same formula. We've just ended up changing this from a plus to a minus. Okay, now let's try the same thing on the cosine. So remember, cosine, you're going to be doing cosine of A plus, and we're talking about a negative B here. And so the cosine formula for the sum of two angles was cosine, cosine, sine, sine, sine. So it's cosine A cosine negative B minus sine of A sine of negative B. Now I'm going to take the same things that I figured out here and apply them down here and rewrite. So this is actually cosine of A minus B, of course. Now, cosine of negative B is just plain cosine of B. That's what we learned in the last section. The last page. Last section, section A, sorry. So this is cosine of A, cosine of B, and sine of negative B, of course, is negative sine of positive B. So negative sine of A times negative sine of positive B. And again, this is not sine A minus sine B. This is sine A times negative sine B. So we have a negative times a negative, which means you get to rewrite this one more time. A minus B plus so this is kind of cool. This is actually the same pattern that we had on the last page. Cosine of A plus B was cosine, cosine, sine, 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 cosine A, cosine B, minus sine of A, sine of B. And now, because we've taken the difference between A and B, we've got cosine, cosine, plus sine, sine. So just as we did up here, we ended up flipping the sign here. In this case, with the cosine of the difference, we ended up flipping the sign here, but everything else was the same. So that's really nice because it means that we can have a single formula here for treating both the sine of A plus B and the sine of A minus B. And it goes like this. Sine is sine of A, cosine of B, plus or minus sine, cosine, cosine of A, sine of B. What that means, this plus or minus here and the plus or minus here, it means that if you're adding two angles, sine of A plus B, you're going to use the plus here. If you're subtracting two angles, sine of A minus B, you're going to use a minus sign here. But everything else is the same. Alrighty, now here's the funky part. Cosine of A plus or minus B, cosine of A, cosine of B, minus plus sine of A, sine of B. So, how does this work? Well, if we're taking the cosine of A plus B, we'll do this formula. Use a minus sign, because the minus is on top, plus is on top here. So we're going to do the opposite sign. If this is plus, this is minus. If we're doing the cosine of A minus B, that's the bottom sign here, we're going to use the plus. So whatever sign you have here for the cosine, you're going to do the opposite sign here. So again, sine of A plus or minus B is sine, cosine, cosine, sine. And then the cosine one is cosine, cosine, sine, sine, sine. And that sign emphasis is there to remind you that the sign is opposite what it is here. It's goofy. I know. Anyway, that's page 3 for part B.